All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the 208th Scientific Governance and Risk meeting here at MakerDAO. My name is Peyton, and I go by Pros11 online. I'm one of the governance facilitators here, joined by a bunch of awesome people who contribute to the Maker protocol or are generally interested in its well-being. This is our weekly call where we get to go over kind of what's going on in Maker, both what's happening in terms of votes, in terms of protocol risk, and updates on what people are up to. So thank you so much for joining us, whether you're here with us live or watching the recording afterwards. For those that are here live, I will go over a few ground rules to get started. Number one, let's try not to talk over each other. Like I said, this is a recording meeting. So it's really nice if we can make sure we can hear everyone's point, especially for those who aren't able to attend. There's a couple features that'll help you not speak over one another. We have the raised hand feature in Zoom. If you go to reactions when you're on desktop, you should find it there. By raising your hand, you kind of join our informal speakers list. So basically I'll give you a call as someone finishes up their point, and we can kind of progress that way. Likewise, if you are unable to come to the mic or don't want to have your voice or face on camera, you can always just drop your comments or questions in the chat. I'll work them in when conversationally appropriate. Helps if you have a @Peyton or @Pros in there. Will help draw my attention to it, but either way, I'll be reading and trying to work them in. One thing I'm trying to get better at, that's hopefully helpful for people on the call and on the recording, is introducing people as they speak. So if you can help me out with that, if I happen to forget your title here at Maker, always feel free to lead off with that. Cool. So I think that covers most of the rules. The only other one I want to say is this is an open meeting. Like we really appreciate everyone taking the time another day to be here. So yeah, please ask questions, please comment, please engage in our discussions, because your voice matters, and we're only a community because you're here to be a part of it. Cool. I think that does it. Let's get on with our show. All right. So we'll start as usual with our governance roundup, featuring what's going on in the votes, the latest with Maker improvement proposals, and what's happening on the forum. Today we do have a couple brief initiatives. I'll tell you about our little merge party POAP we did for people hanging out with us last night, and for the Maker community in general for getting through the merge. Then I'll be sharing some slides on burnout here at MakerDAO, some ideas on how we can help prevent it, as well as identify it. After that, we'll transition to our discussion section. That'll be kind of the most open. We'll be hearing from the other governance facilitator, Patrick J, on the Coinbase USDC institutional rewards myth, kind of hearing about some of the things they still need to do to kind of wrap that up and be a complete myth. And then we'll also be hearing from someone from the growth team on kind of how that came to be and the value of our institutional partners. If there's time after that, we did also think MIP 80 MKR compensation guidelines would be a good discussion topic. But yeah, we'll see how we get through. We do respect your time and appreciate you being here, so we will try to keep this to an hour and a half today. Awesome. Let's get into votes then. All right, we had a pretty quiet week in terms of settlements on the polls front. We'll go to the next slide. Excellent. We'll have 6 active ratification polls. Voting ends for those on September 26th, and you'll hear a bit more about them in our next segment. Also wanted to draw attention to the 3 green light polls we have ending on Monday. Those are polls in the Maker system where we say, all right, here's a applicant who would like to be onboarded for collateral within the MakerDAO system. How does the community feel? Some other governance systems use temperature checks for proposals. You could maybe view this as a temperature check for our collateral onboarding process. So make sure you get your vote in on those before Monday, as that is when the votes end. We'll go to the next slide. I'll talk about executives. Maybe due to merge, a couple other factors, who knows, but we do still have a pending executive from yesterday. There's about 55,000 MKR supporting it last I looked. That one contains core unit budget streams, 2 special purpose funds funding. We've got the update to the HV bank legal agreement, and finally some MKR stream accounting cleanup. Basically just making it so the UIs don't have to do anything special to notice when we have cut off a stream due to it being distributed, but not entirely used up. So next week, we are going to be giving a week off to the executive team. This is in part because we didn't have any concluded weekly polls this week, and because we've been angling to give them some time off, given all the extra work around the merge and whatnot. So hope they enjoy that and get to go back to building some of the cool things we want to see down the pipeline. Awesome. That should do it for me on the votes. I believe we have Pablo presenting, one of our MIP editors, to give you the MIPs update.
Yeah, thank you, Peyton, and hello, everyone. Pablo here. So the ratification polls for the September cycle went up on Monday. We had 6 of them. We had the MakerDAO delegates MIP set that formalizes delegates in the protocol and how they are to be compensated, with no being its leading option at the moment. We also had 2 MKR budgets, one for the Gov Alpha team, whose leading option at the moment is the 100% multiplier. There is a business as usual, and one for Stargate, whose leading option is currently no. We had one coordinate offboarding for strategic happiness coordinates with yes as the leading option. We also had one amendment that modifies MIP 61, the delegate compensation, by replacing the fixed start date with a rolling window to the effect of calculating participation metrics. If the delegate MIP set passes, this one will have no effect as MIP 61 would be deprecated. And finally, we have a 81,000 DAI SPF for funding further work from the ambassador program with yes as the leading option. Now let's move on to the recent / most active proposals in RFC. We have 4 standalone MIPs. MIP 80, which is going to be discussed today, describes how MKR will be used to recruit, retain, and align talent in the Maker community. MIP 81 onboards an account representing MakerDAO to Coinbase Prime and transfers 1/3 of the PSM's USDC into custody to earn USDC rewards with Coinbase. MIP 82 onboards and activates the 5 million DAI real-world asset vault for the purpose of acquiring USDC via the PSM and provide an USDC loan to Coinbase. And the most recent one, MIP 86, aims to establish a collaboration between CoinShares and Maker, whereby CoinShares will manage about 13% of the PSM's USDC and invest it, providing a variable APY in USDC to Maker. Next slide, please. I think we skipped one. Yeah, so we have on budget a proposal for the tax core unit with 3 options: the extension of their previously ratified budget, that is business as usual, a new base, about 86% of the current budget, and 𝘧𝘪𝘴, about 76%. An erratum is needed here. This proposal is eligible to enter the November cycle, not the October cycle, as we stated on the previous GNR call. Yeah, so this is not a formal submission, it's a proposal in RFC. That's my bad. So we have a 258,000 DAI SPF to support onboarding Blood Tower credit as a real-world asset arranger. Next slide. One new amendment for MIP 41, facilitator framework. This amendment shortens the RFC period for the facilitator offboarding and reduces the on-chain poll duration to 1 week. And finally, there's the numerous proposals that make up 1 or possibly more endgame pre-launch MIP sets with 3 top-level MIPs, 3 coordinate mandate modifications, an amendment to MIP 16 that disallows non-standard weekly polls and signal requests unless they are required by ratified MIPs, the deprecation of a number of MIPs, and 3 core unit offboardings. So as for the important dates, ratification polls will run for 2 weeks until Monday, September the 26th, and Wednesday, September the 28th is the last day for modifications for proposals aiming to enter the October cycle. And thank you. That's pretty much all from me.
Right on, Pablo. Thanks for the concise update as always. I believe that is going to take us to our forum updates, and those will be presented by Artem on the governance communications query.
Yep, presenting for unofficially the second time today. But yes, so welcome everyone to the weekly forum recap. My name's Artem from GovComms, and for this recap, we're going over the week of September 7th to the 14th, yesterday. And let's start with probably the most anticipated news and updates of the week, which was the eth beacon chain merge that happened early this morning. Well, apparently when nobody was asleep, from what I understand. Nonetheless, though, the community at Maker has been hard at work to ensure that our protocol continues to operate smoothly in the wake of the now successful merge. So if you're interested for a quick breakdown of what each core unit has been up to, check out the latest weekly relay that was posted this morning. And next up, let's welcome One-Stone Delegate as our newest recognized delegate, represented by TrueMaker, as most of you may know on the forum. One-Stone Delegate's primary objective is to advocate for growth initiatives that will boost DAI adoption and increase MKR value. He also was on the Meet Your Delegate 19 call yesterday. I believe that was yesterday. Or the day before, yeah, yesterday, and which focuses on the One-Stone's delegate platform, but that call is available on YouTube, so go check it out. And next up, we have also recognized delegate Tim Black, who is spearheading the creation of an open call, an effort to help guide the decentralized voter committee calls towards producing some actionable feedback. The first call reached about 16 participants, and while the call was not posted, an effort for the participants to speak freely and just have more autonomy. Actionable feedback was gathered after the call and posted in appropriate threads, such as the Endgame v3, clustering MIP, POVE, and the offboarding MIPs as well for events and strategic happiness. The next call will be held at 3 p.m. UTC on this Friday, September 16th. So keep an eye on the thread for some details on that, and also on our public calendar if you want to join. And finally, next up, we have ADCV from Strategic Finance Core Unit, who posted a table of their core unit's special purpose funds for real-world asset initiatives. And the table gathers data such as disbursements, relative forum threads, governance statuses, authors, purposes, and work statuses. And it's all in one easily referenced thread. And next, we're moving on to our signal requests, and there's currently one signal request running. And on June 16th of this year, a poll to manage the 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘕 airdrops and VNFT had passed. And in response to this, Ace from Strategic Finance met with Brian from PE, as well as the 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘕 finance team, to understand what would be the best way to manage the VNFT in a more decentralized way. And they determined that the multi-sig would be the best solution for managing this airdrop. Therefore, ACE requests 4 trusted community members to volunteer as signers for a MIP 47 compliant multi-sig to vote for the MakerDAO's VNFT on 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘕 Finance. Now, the poll ends on September 21st, and so far, approximately 62 votes are in favor to proceed with this request. And that's it. For more news, updates, announcements, signal requests, especially discussions that are going on within the Maker forums, check out the more comprehensive forum at a glance, which is posted every Thursday morning.
Thanks, Artem. And yeah, big echo there. What you see here is just a little snippet. So both for the weekly MIPS update and for the forum at a glance, we've got a full forum article with links out to the other threads. So if you're trying to explore Maker governance, that's a great place to start. Thanks for the update. And yeah, let's move on to initiative updates. Awesome. I believe I'm going to be passing the mic over to my fellow governance facilitator, Patrick J.
Hi, everyone. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just wanted to highlight something that GovAlpha put together to kind of celebrate Maker and the merge. It's a big event in the Ethereum community, and you know, I think everyone feels that Maker's been quite tough over the past few months. So we commissioned some artwork from our multi-talented MIP editor, Pablo. who has created this POAP, which is to commemorate the merge at MakerDAO. So we have already distributed this to everyone that joined the call last night or this morning, but we overestimated numbers and we got about 200 mint links. So we are opening it up to MakerDAO contributors and delegates, and basically if anyone wants to mint this POAP for themselves, get in touch with Peyton or myself and we can send you a link that will allow you to mint it. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight this. Thought it was great work from Pablo.
Right on. And humble himself. What's Patrick's idea to kind of throw it together? And was really pleased with the results. Also brought in several new people that typically like aren't part of our maker conversations because of the POAP agenda, I assume, or because they were bored waiting for the merge. Either way, it was really nice to get some new voices, talk to them a little bit about maker governance, and kind of share in our collective expectations for what's going to happen with Ethereum. That's funny. Sorry, catching up on the chat there. All right. Well, thanks, Patrick, for that update. And yeah, please do reach out to us via DM if you're part of the Maker community and you would like to celebrate being here for the merge. Right on. Let's go to the next slide. Perhaps for a bit less fun topic, I'm aware, but hopefully can end on a positive note and really highlight some issues I think are probably pretty prevalent in the community right now. So take me to the next slide, Thomas. Awesome. So goal is just to spend no more than like 10 minutes here, probably even a little less, going over like what is burnout, how do we identify it, and what can we do to kind of prevent it from taking hold and affecting the efficiency here at MakerDAO. Next slide, please. All right. So one like good thing to like identify, like stress is a component of burnout, right? Like I think a lot of times when we think burnout, we or at least I personally will sometimes like think, oh yeah, stress, burned out. But burnout is specifically like a prolonged experience of stress, and kind of basically is what happens when the body is exposed to higher levels of stress and kind of unideal conditions. And as we're going to see here, results in some pretty not fun symptoms that have a real tangible effect on workforce productivity, as well as like community vibes and general discontent. So in terms of burnout symptoms, also just wanted to give a little disclaimer here, like while going through these, I was kind of floored how many maybe described myself. So if you feel a similar way, like you're not alone, not having this conversation to like try to have anyone talk about it here on the call, like basically want to offer support afterwards. Don't feel like you need to share your story here or anything like that. Just kind of wanted to present the issues at hand, make us aware of it, and then kind of present a little plan for how we can combat it. So burnout symptoms, there's physical symptoms of burnout. These largely look like a lot of the stress symptoms, right? Feeling tired, possibly increase in illness due to the prolonged stress response, headaches or muscle pain, changes in appetite and sleep. Not good, but perhaps you can associate those things with some other stuff. Next slide, if you would, Thomas. There's also some emotional signs of burnout that start to get a little more heavy. So that sense of failure, self-doubt, feeling trapped, detachment, losing motivation, kind of cynical thoughts, or decreased satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. Perhaps you're already starting to see how this becomes like pretty problematic in a DAO sense, where we are so autonomous, where your work depends on kind of you being able to present it, to feel proud of it, to share it with the community and advocate for its use. And then even worse, if you'll go to the next slide, Thomas, are behavioral symptoms of burnout, right? So we get things like withdrawing from responsibilities, isolating yourself from others, procrastinating, abusing, kind of anything that gets dopamine, taking out frustrations on others, kind of elevated chat interactions perhaps, and then leaving work or coming in later or leaving early. So kind of when we get to the behavioral symptoms, we start to see like, oh wow, in terms of a DAO, this is potentially crippling if it starts to become widespread. You know, we're DAO, we have a lot of people. Some people have said maybe we have too much a workforce, and that's fine if you think that. But even if you were to reduce it significantly, we still rely on a lot of people, and our productivity and output is dependent on those people's well-being. So if you'll take me to the next slide, Thomas. Yeah, not fun. Like I said, really don't mean to kind of trigger a response if that does describe you. So now we kind of are going to move into the hope section. 3R approach is a great way to kind of address burnout. The first step is to recognize, to self-assess and say, hey, do any of these symptoms kind of describe myself? Am I potentially going through the phases of burnout? If the answer is yes, then your next step is going to be to start to reverse them. The best way to do that is seeking support in managing stress, right? Talking about this issue with others, particularly health professionals, and taking measures to make sure that you're not remaining in an overly stressed state. And finally, is that resilience aspect, this idea that like a healthy body and a healthy mind can kind of combat burnout quite a bit. So doing things like exercising, better diet, things like setting boundaries, you know, a time to turn off the Discord, a time to be with your family and not respond to emails anymore. Those are all things that can help kind of build up that resilience and keep burnout from setting in. Yes, those are all kind of like individual levels, right? And I think it's not a great approach to say, all right, well, individuals who are facing burnout should be the ones who pull themselves out of burnout. That might have to be a case if it gets bad enough, but we as a DAO can actually do a lot to prevent that. So if you'll take me next slide, Thomas. All right, so there's a pretty compelling study from like 1998, but I didn't find any more relevant ones in terms of what a workforce can do about this. And it basically suggested that burnout can kind of be addressed at 3 different levels, or 3 different levels of intervention. The first is primary, and that's aiming at reducing risk factors across all employees. Right? You think of like the entire pool of the MakerDAO community. What are things we can do to address that entire pool and make sure people don't start progressing down burnout? Secondary intervention is going to be like a selected high-risk group of people. These aren't necessarily only going to be like facilitators or delegates, but you might think those are like a good high-risk group, right? People who bear a lot of the public responsibility for what's happening at the DAO. And then finally, so like tertiary, this is individuals that are already suffering from burnout. And you know, the truth is, as you move down the list, it gets harder and harder to combat, and it relies more and more on the individual to pull themselves out, while they themselves get less and less capable of doing so. So I think that really highlights like why it is important for us to kind of think about burnout holistically. And if you'll go to my last slide, Thomas, I've got a 3-pronged approach that we're kind of recommending for what we can do. At least 2 of the ones, I guess all 3 really do involve other people, but at least 2 of them are things that you don't need any input from 𝘍𝘍 at all if there's something you think you can do to help out. So starting at that primary level and moving down, more social activity. Things like last night's merge event were really great. We had people who have disagreed on events coming together, sharing their experiences, having a good time, gifts, you know, chat, all sorts of good vibes going around. And it was remarked that we really should be doing that more. And that's something I agree. Next step down to kind of address that secondary level, high risk individuals. 𝘍𝘍 is looking to do some user interviews. So we'll be reaching out to you. Feel free to reach out to us as well. Basically looking to have some one-on-one chats, try to collect some quotes to put together a doc that'll be anonymized, kind of reporting some of the statements of burnout in the community. We believe this will not only like allow the maker community to see potentially how big of a risk this is right now, but also give a chance for anyone who's being affected by this to really share their story and see if we can come up with anything that might be able to help out. And finally, we have social reminders. So this is kind of that like last level of like, hey, people might already be experiencing burnout. What are some things that we can do for them, or we can help them do for themselves? So incorporating like things into public calls that refresh the value of expressing gratitude. Gratitude is a great thing to do for people that are experiencing burnout. I can kind of attest to it personally when I'm struggling with mental health. One of the first steps I do to get myself reset is to kind of think about the things I'm grateful about. Think about what I'm really happy to be able to have or do, or take pride in. That really resets the mindset and starts from the individual. So that's one effort. There's also assuming good faith in discussions, right? We say this a lot, but it is really important that when we're discussing proposals and people are passionately bringing their ideas on how they think Maker can be better, starting from a place of like, okay, this person thinks this is a good idea. How can I explain why I might disagree with that, rather than attacking a person and trying to accuse them of doing something malicious. And finally, I think we can, on calls like this in our Discord, in the forum, something like that, we can recognize the value of kind of the asymmetric value, of recognition. And that's just the idea that it takes very little time to say, I appreciate you doing this. I see you putting in work here, and it means a lot to me. But its effects can be huge. One of the primary causes of burnout is going to be that underappreciation. This idea that people feel underworked and underappreciated is kind of the primary cause for burnout. So a really easy way to combat that at the individual level is to just practice more telling people how much we appreciate them when we see them doing good work. Okay, I ran through that kind of fast and there was a ton of chat here, so I'm going to try to catch up on that. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments while I try to make sure I didn't miss anything. Some paper stroke about suing facilitators instead of delegates. Thank you. I'm sure that will help. All right. Cool. I know David said you have a poll. Do you have the power? I can try to look at it, but it will distract my attention. Oh, there it is. And these are like anonymized. So if you want to participate, you can. Don't feel obliged to participate by any means. Like I said, we are looking to do like user interviews. But having talked to a lot of people in the DAO, it kind of seems like this might be more and more of a pressing concern, and wanted to take a few minutes to showcase it today. All right. Well, I see like some questions about doing like offsites. Like there's clearly like a lot of ideas we can do to boost morale, and I would throw out like a big appreciation if we wanted to post those in the forum or get something going in the Discord chatting about different ways we can maybe take holistic steps to address this problem in the DAO. But here was basically about an hour of my time to run this down for you and hopefully provide some resources. Paper, I do have the links to like all this stuff. They were just screenshots in the slides, but I'll make sure they get added in so people can access them later. Sorry. Cool. Well, don't want to belabor the point of burnout too much, and we do have some really awesome presentations to talk about and some proposals to get to. So I will move us along into our discussion segment. But before going there, if everyone would like to join me, you don't have to have your cameras on. If you do, we'll be able to see you doing it, which is kind of fun. But I just want us to take like a big collective breath together. One of the cool things about breathing is fast breathing is actually a stress response of the body. So when you slow down your breathing, it almost like inherently calms your muscles. Just because that is the opposite of the stress response, and it kind of signals to your body that you're in a safe place. So I'm just going to do a big inhale for 5 seconds and then exhale for 5 seconds. If you'd like to join me, I'd appreciate it. Let's go. One big breath, inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Thanks for indulging me, everyone. And let's get on to a good discussion segment.
Can we get that button on the forum?
Well, what button was that? Sorry, Tim?
I think everybody on the forum needs to learn how to take a deep breath. That was all.
That would be so awesome.
Take a breath. I like that. I'll see what I can find. Thanks. All right. Let's get into the discussion topic. I believe we're going to start with the Coinbase proposal. And again, I'm going to call on Patrick, my fellow governance facilitator, to kind of go over the state of the proposal, some kind of suggestions we made, and anything else he feels is relevant. If you're ready, take it away, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. So just before we get started, just a brief synopsis of what this is. This is not 𝘱𝘁𝘆 saying whether or not this is a good investment decision. This is not 𝘱𝘁𝘆 saying whether or not it's safe to transfer funds to Coinbase. This is a commentary on the actual governance aspects of this proposal. So just before anyone might misinterpret what we're about to say. But if we can move to the next slide, we do have some concerns about the governance process around this proposal. I'm just going to go through them briefly here. So firstly, this MIP does not follow the MIP template at all. It has been modified slightly since we raised this with the author, but a requirement for any MIP at Maker is that it follows the template that's defined in MIP0. Per MIP0, a MIP should provide it has 5 categories here, but the things that we think we're lacking in this MIP from Coinbase is completeness and clarity. We think there's quite a lot of stuff lacking from this proposal. It's a very low level description only. And we think that for governance to make an informed decision about this proposal, there needs to be much more information for people to make an informed vote. Some of the things we've highlighted as being quite as particular concerns, there's a lack of provision for core unit or maker governance oversight in this proposal. So essentially, the MIP is saying, this MIP would approve transfer of 1.6 billion DAI to Coinbase, and it defines kind of the stability fee that Maker would earn on that. But the actual process of how that USDC gets to Coinbase isn't there. There's no process for assessment from CES or strategic finance or any legal bodies that MakerDAO might want to involve in this decision. There's no provision for those people to then say no. So, for example, if you look at a MIP6 process, a collateral gets greenlit, and then the domain teams can recommend that we don't pursue that collateral, in which case no further work is done. That is not present in this MIP. It does say there would be an arranger. That is not defined who that is in the MIP. And there's also a statement made in the MIP that Maker could withdraw the USDC from Coinbase with kind of 6 minutes notice. But from 𝘱𝘁𝘆's perspective, we would need to know how you actually get that message to Coinbase. So is that from an arranger who's got a defined set of criteria, and what are those criteria? Is it from the passage of a governance vote? So actually, it's not going to be 6 minutes, it's going to be 3 days plus 6 minutes. Is it from the passage of an executive vote? So you'd need to go governance vote, executive vote, 48 hours, and then 6 minutes. So these are all things that we think governance needs to be aware of and to consider before they make a decision on this proposal. If we go to the next slide, please. So what are some solutions to this? So already raised, we already discussed this at the collateral management call on Monday, which is attended by multiple core units. The outcome of that was that strategic finance will take point when they're communicating concerns and ideas with Coinbase, although prior to that and subsequent to that, 𝘱𝘁𝘆 has actually spoken to Coinbase via the forum as well. So these are our recommendations. and we would just like to highlight them to the community and inform the community of what we've advised Coinbase is required to make this a valid proposal. So we need to ensure, first of all, that the MIP actually meets the template. That's partially been done, but it's still incomplete. We have advised that they add a process component so that MakerDAO can appoint an arranger and confirm that arranger via the governance process. If an arranger cannot be found, we would advise the MIP then halts. If that's the case, they might want to find an alternative. And also we advised the following. So we advised provision for assessments by a legal team working for MakerDAO, provision for an assessment by CES, and provision for assessment by StratFi or a CU who's focused on real world assets. And these kind of provisions are basically based on MIP 65 and MIP 82 from Monetalis, which have these provisions within them. And they quite clearly state, if CES are unhappy, this deal will not proceed. So this is just a highlight of what 𝘰𝘀 has pointed out and what we have recommended to Coinbase. And just wanted to see if anyone had any further feedback on this or anything else they wanted us to raise. I did see some stuff in the chat there, particularly I think Sam had said, pending due diligence, this deal is a pretty obvious yes. The problem 𝘰𝘀 has is that the MIP, MIPs are a top level governance process. They are the most powerful tool that Maker has in terms of governance. If a MIP passes that says you must send 1.6 billion DAI to this address without any mention of due diligence, 𝘰𝘀 will be compelled to transfer that DAI via an exec. We don't have the power to override a MIP and say, oh, now we need to go for due diligence. So that due diligence needs to be baked into the proposal itself before we can ensure it needs to be done. So I think you're agreeing that we need due diligence. So I'm just pointing out why we're not just doing this post hoc, because if a MIP passes with instructions, we will follow out those instructions. But I'll open up to the floor. Anyone have any questions?
Again, my direct questions, like specifically about kind of what Patrick presented here about the viability of the MIP and its completeness. We do have someone from Growth here to kind of talk about how our partnership with Coinbase has evolved and get some insight as to this deal in particular. But if you do have any questions for Patrick, would love to showcase them now. All right, very thorough as usual, Patrick. Appreciate you taking the time to lay that out. As you said, this has all been communicated to Coinbase. I do see a hand from Jacob, so I'm going to cut myself off and hand the mic over now.
Sure, and I put a question in chat about MIP 67, and that MIP provides that for avoidance of doubt, the relevant community CU stakeholder teams commit as a part of this MIP to publicly recommend a negative vote to the community for those proposals that do not incorporate the criteria set forth in the methodology or do not follow the standardized process described below. So I'm wondering if this is such a proposal that triggers MIP 67, and if so, whether 𝘰𝘀 has a position on who the relevant stakeholders would be.
So just to answer that specific question, MIP 67 is intended to apply only to applications via MIP 6, which this isn't. This is a standalone top-level MIP. So it would be my opinion as a governance facilitator that MIP 67 doesn't apply. We've recommended some relevant stakeholders based on what we consider to be kind of core units that could provide reassurance and security to make a governance when they're making a decision. But I wouldn't consider MIP 67 to be a tool that would allow us to block anything if this MIP was passed in its current form.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can never find the hand raise button, but this is Jen from Growth. Just to kind of chime in, I know it was asked, what was Growth's role in this. So it's very simple. Coinbase has been a partner of ours for many years. And as such, we're always talking about different ways that we can utilize our partner platforms to increase DAI usage, DAI adoption, essentially growth for the protocol. And one of these discussions was born out of this new product that Coinbase is launching, and they brought that to us as a first opportunity. And so conversations kind of just took place from there, where growth as kind of this front end to partners and external, participants and applications across the ecosystem can have a direct line in and kind of be a sounding board to say, hey, this is what we think would be great for Maker. What do you guys think? So with that, that's really how the conversation started. And then of course, strategic finance helped, just kind of with the frameworks of what other current discussions have been taking place in the forums and where interest is in possibly monetizing the USDC in the PSM. So if that's helpful, as just kind of how this conversation was born, great. If there's additional questions as to growth's role, I'm happy to share, but that's pretty much it. We're in touch with our partners all the time. Sometimes conversations go nowhere, but then sometimes we wind up finding new opportunities that didn't even exist. And that's kind of the whole life cycle of being in BD.
But I really appreciate you coming to tell us that, Jen. And we'll pause for questions on this for a little longer. While I wait for any to surface, you can have a fun pros fact. A couple of years ago, I was actually kind of Coinbase was indirectly responsible for me joining Maker. That I used to grind those Coinbase earned things, and came across Maker DAOs and was like, wait a second, that actually sounds kind of interesting. Before you know it, I was degenning around and found myself commenting on the forum. So definitely some fruits of the partnership labor present in the ecosystem today.
Hey, Jen, this is Chris from Vertical Engineering. Is there any room in the deal for growth to suggest to Coinbase sort of what I mentioned on the last governance call, which is that they, rather than us like moving custody over to them, they just, do the deal with the USDC that's in the PSM block to block. I mean, it seems to me that as far as I can tell, that has like only one additional risk factor over everything else, because like we can use it for quick liquidity, block to block. It's available. It would, possibly get drained in under the right circumstances. We don't end up with a lot of the like sort of risk and custody issues. About the only thing I see as a risk if we ask for that is it further incentivizes governance to not divest themselves of USDC holding. Which I think is like kind of a major risk factor given, I don't know, just like say given the scale of USDC backing DAI at this point, that we really shouldn't be incentivized to hold more of it. So I will say like, at least from the like factions perspective of like decentralists, it would allay a lot of our concerns. I think if we could just leave the USDC in the PSM and Coinbase could, pay the sort of interest rate based on that balance block to block, right? Without us having to move to them for custody.
Yeah, it is something that came up in kind of preliminary discussions. I don't want to miscommunicate like the reasons why it couldn't be done at this time, but I think there's probably some legal reasons or, regulatory reasons and just like that workflow. So I don't know if I have like the best answer on that. But to answer your question directly, yes, it kind of came up. That would be an ideal situation. And I would say we can continue to, ask Coinbase for additional clarity on maybe why that's not a possibility in the forums. But from their perspective, this is a new product they're launching, again, with Maker as kind of their launch partner, and it's a treasury management product that fits into their custodial solution. So, like sitting on their product team, it's not ideal that new product doesn't actually obtain, funds in the custody, right? Like, so it wouldn't really do the new product that they're trying to roll out justice, in their minds. But I think, yeah, there could be additional, barriers to having it sit in the PSM at this current time. But yeah, it was something that was discussed, and it wasn't something that seemed possible right now.
I definitely appreciate the insight and you taking the time to come out and explain it for us, Jen.
Sure.
Awesome. I've seen some chat, some comments in the chat, I guess I would say, about like the level of yield and stuff. I don't know if anyone wanted to speak to that. We have kind of moved on from the initial governance concerns. So if we wanted to talk a bit more about the proposal, we can. I know we did talk about it last week, so I don't intend to be spending the rest of the call on it. But if there are some things people would like to get into the recording, feel free to do so.
Yeah, can I make a more general comment just about, because it's not just Coinbase, there's other proposed arrangements, and we have HVB and we have Monetalis. I just want to like highlight that, when Celsius was struggling and, we were going through the market pullback and there was all this contagion, they lined up all of the people that they owe money into a queue to sort of deal with them as they went through bankruptcy or whatever that was going to happen, right? But with the Maker protocol, they couldn't do that. They had to actually like pay their debt down, right? And that emphasizes the strengths of sort of smart contracts that are, just these agreements on chain. There's no sort of like legal recourse, and I just want to highlight that as we attempt to do, like, I don't even know what exactly we would call this. If we aren't properly risk managing what's going out, that is to say what MKR and what the surplus buffer can handle to take a hit. Yeah, these protocols are likely to wreck the Maker protocol, or these other like arrangements are likely to wreck the Maker protocol if they go insolvent. And that's a very different thing than what we've been building up to this point. Up to this point, it was kind of like hyper risk sensitive. Like we took into account these sort of crazy tail risks, and the protocol could respond to that. And now we're just sort of accepting tail risks, and we're not really accepting tail risks as MKR holders. These tail risks are so large, or let's say the scope of these things is so large, it's going to blow back on DAI holders. And I just I want to highlight that like there is a safe way to do this, and we're not doing it. And yeah, our governance isn't doing it. And so I don't know. I want everyone to just sort of think on that. Like, this is a very different beast than what we built. And we showed the sort of promise of smart contracts with Celsius having to repay their positions, also Nexo having to repay their positions. In the future that we're building, like these, if Coinbase goes insolvent, or if HVB goes insolvent, or if Monetalis goes under, like the surplus buffer, MKR holders, and then DAI holders are on the hook. And it also adds a very clear, like when you look at guidance, or a very clear regulatory pressure point, where basically governance is sort of trying to turn Maker into Circle, basically. And that's not really what we were originally intending to build. And so I don't know. I just I want everyone to just sort of like think about this. I don't think that I think there's a safe way to do this stuff. I just don't think that we're thinking adversarially enough in order to do this safely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note though that like we're not starting from scratch here. Like we already have sort of this existential USDC exposure. So this danger already exists. So simply a kind of shuffling around the custodian that are roughly comparable sort of risk levels, I guess you could call it, counterparty risk. It doesn't really change the overall risk profile all that much.
Well,
And
I
if
think
we're getting revenue out of it, I mean, I just consider that a win.
I mean, I think it does. I think after the tornado sanctions, the entire risk profile changed for all real world assets, including USDC and the other stable coins in the PSMs.
Sure, but I mean, we had this exposure, like, regardless. It's not like the one option where we just get rid of the USDC. We would have to impose massive negative interest rates to do that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what everybody should be considering. Is that
sure? But that's a separate discussion. We can definitely consider that.
Well, sort of, except
negative interest rates is okay.
I mean, earning income on this is absolutely going to incentivize MKR holders to not divest themselves of the USDC, and I think that is a risk in and of itself. Like, so even under my like perfect scenario where the maker protocol maintains custody of the USDC, I still think we've aligned the incentives incorrectly. We should be incentivized to offload that USDC now, not keep it on the books. We should keep it below a scope where it's an existential threat. And I do agree, we're completely in existential threat territory, but I don't think it's risk-free, and I do think it adds a little bit additional risk because the custody is different and because it actually like incentivizes governance to keep the USDC on the books.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not saying risk-free. I'm saying there's a marginal risk change, I think, but it's not like large enough to be the dominant risk there. And I mean, to me, the only way to get out of this is to massively diversify into real world assets. I mean, this has been kind of the goal. I know you guys don't like that, but
well, I'm actually
the only way out, really. Or we have to do negative interest rates and destroy our user base.
Part of diversifying out into real world assets was this idea that they would all be sort of independently risk scoped and jurisdictionally balanced. And with the tight peg, I'm actually worried that the only types of real world assets, quote unquote, that we can diversify into are basically like US Treasury style assets. And so even if we find another jurisdiction under the hood, right, like that jurisdiction is just going to be using like BlackRock ETFs or BlackRock like Treasury vehicles. And I think that it doesn't get us away from the sort of jurisdictional regulatory risk, which I think is ratcheted up quite a bit in the past couple months. So I'm not entirely sure that the DAO's long-term strategy for real world assets is viable at all under the new sort of regulatory regime. I think the paradigm shifted. We're in the then they fight you stage, and everyone needs to like contemplate long and hard about what it is makers actually building here. Are we trying to be the next Circle? Because we can't, right? Because DAI can't be censored, it can't comply. Or are we trying to build a globally unbiased world currency that's available to literally everybody as a public good and a tool for humanity?
Yeah, with regards to sort of these investments, I view them as kind of the first step. I'm seeing a lot more coming over the horizon just because of the high interest rate environment. There's such a huge pressure to have more real world assets being tokenized on chain and forming sort of liquid secondary markets, which is ideal for us. So I think this stuff is just getting started, and we're going to see like more and more of this and jurisdictionally independent sort of solutions, which would be awesome.
You know, I'd like to jump into something you said at the start where you were talking about using smart contracts to kind of mitigate the risk of defalcation or other bad acts by custodians. And I think that that's something that's actually really smart and worth exploring here. I think that it may indeed be that Coinbase can't simply offer block-to-block rewards because of regulatory concerns, and that might be a hard limit on their side. But I think this is a place where we're a potential big enough customer, a big enough holder of USDC, where I hope that Growth and Strat Finance can look at proposing some sort of multi-sig wallet arrangements or time-locked wallets where we would have some ability to potentially get funds back while meeting whatever regulatory requirements in terms of the beneficial, the ultimate beneficiary entity that's holding the deposit rights. We can kind of belt and suspenders ourselves both with regulatory protections that say these wouldn't be part of the bankruptcy estate, as well as smart contract protections that make it impossible for a creditor to seize these assets.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense to me. This is just sort of the first step I see, and like we can use this as leverage to get better and better deals as we go.
Thanks, Jacob. Do you see a hand from one of our recognized delegates, 𝘱𝘬𝘦? If you want to take the mic.
Yes. Yeah. I was just going to add that. So certainly we should try to do this safely, and we can kind of worry about working out the details. But when it comes to asking, oh, should we have like exposure to USDC or to real world assets at all? I feel like that's a question that really should be going to the large maker holders. Burn has made his opinion that he liked the deal, but ultimately, like, they're the ones who should be setting the overall direction of the protocol. It shouldn't be just like us as a small delegate or a core unit member saying, well, we need to get rid of these real world assets. It should be them. And like, so far they seem to be on track with the real world assets. So I'd be very interested to see if there is like a large maker holder out there who wants us to take a different direction. Or is that like a real thing, or is that just something that we're kind of discussing internally among ourselves while the maker holders have a very different view?
Definitely highlighting kind of one of the fundamental issues of governance is like, how do you get the signal from the maker holders into the workforce? Appreciate you bringing that up, 𝘱𝘬𝘦.
I mean, some of them post on the forums, and they seem to like real world assets. So yeah, but you're right. There's no like official poll.
Yeah, much like many token governance systems, right? Only a very small percentage of our total available tokens vote in proposals. So obviously the people who show up are the ones who get to say, but it can be quite hard to predict at what line other MKR might activate and decide to come in and vote. All right, well, I know we discussed this quite a bit last week. I really appreciate all the different voices we had on this, but I might give one final call here before we move on to our other discussion topic. Chris Black is asking who can set up a Q&A with Coinbase, like live recorded, most of our MakerDAO calls. Typically, like for Gov Alpha, like we suggest it, but it's kind of up to proposal authors if they want to set up a Know Your MIPS call. Obviously, a couple of the core units have been working with them on this proposal, so if they want to float that by Gov Alpha, or looks like SES has already tried to do that and no answer yet. But yeah, we'll definitely have people to host that call should they be open to it. Well, this is kind of petering out, so I think I am going to move us along. We've got a little less than 30 minutes left on our planning call. If there's not much discussion, I am open to ending early, but otherwise happy to take it to explore another one of our proposals in RFC. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind clicking through to the next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the MIP 80 MKR compensation guidelines, and we do so happen to have the author on the call with us. I don't know if you wanted to take a moment to maybe talk about your motivations for this, or kind of what you hoped it would accomplish, 𝘱𝘬𝘦.
Oh, sure. Happy to talk about it. So really, I just want to create a standardized system so that we're not spending a lot of time and energy kind of arguing over, 18 or 20 different sets of maker compensation guidelines. Yeah, it's still in rough draft. To be clear, I'd really love to have more feedback because I like when I put out like the 75% number, that was just kind of the number I made up, and I'm not an expert on vesting, so I really just saw that we were getting a lot of these proposals and there was no clear kind of standard. And when you get that, it turns to a lot of people start viewing it personally, like, oh, we're rejecting your maker compensation because we don't like you type thing. And I don't want that to be the case. I want it to be that people who request maker vesting will know in advance whether they're going to get it or not, because it follows the guidelines or it doesn't follow the guidelines. So that's it. I just want to make it simpler and kind of more clear for everyone involved.
That's an awesome, concise rundown. Thank you. So obviously, one group of particularly affected stakeholders would be core unit facilitators. Kind of note at present in this draft, it doesn't appear to be retroactive, right? It seems to be implying to be going forward. I guess that could be edited if you felt that was prudent. But at present,
yeah, just to clear, I'm really don't want to make it like be messing with past vesting setups. I just want it to be going forward to where everyone knows, because there is a lot of legacy stuff out there. So yeah, I would just have it a straightforward. This is what you're vesting. This is what the maker you're going to get each year is based on your salary. That would be my preference.
Awesome. That's really great having that clarity, and one of the reasons we love when we can get MIP authors on the call. We brought this up on the mandated drafters call the other day just to draw attention to it, right? We tend to highlight proposals for the rest of the core unit facilitators that might affect them. So I don't know if any of the core unit facilitators wanted to share any of their initial thoughts on that. And I'm always happy to fill in give Alpha's perspective, but it's certainly limited by our neutrality mandate. So can get a lot more into details if someone is willing to kind of express what they feel about it.
Hey, Peyton, I'll jump in here just because I've commented a couple of times on this particular proposal. By the way, it's Robert with CES, facilitator for that core unit. And I think the first decision is that as a community, do we need to have guidelines, right? So that's just a question that the community will answer through voting, however that might work. And the second piece of that is that for me, it's always about what's market-driven rates for compensation and incentives, because whether we like it or not, we compete against a much broader audience for talent. And that talent is not only engineers, but it's also program people and project people and communication people and all sorts of individuals, because we have a very unique setup as well. So we're looking for the best of the best. It's that simple. So for me, it's ensuring that we're doing whatever we're doing isn't just a bunch of opinions from individuals, and I appreciate the well-meaningness of that, but let's ground this in reality. And I think there is a process where we can put out like an RFP or an RFQ or something out into the domain to be able to request a professional that does this every single day, to be able to help us understand what are the realities of the market. But it's also not just today. This happens on an ongoing basis, because as someone that's been hiring since the very beginning of my core unit, it's really tough. I'm competing against a lot of very significant other organizations that are offering very lucrative deals, and I can't match it. And I don't think it's unreasonable what's being asked for. It's just that the dynamics that's over the past year, the dynamics with the MKR price and the initial assumptions that I made when I first put my core unit out there, what's happened is that decrease in price has really eaten up, if you will, the supply that I initially asked for. So there's a lot of different aspects of this that we have to balance. And I just want to be clear with the community, no one's getting rich right now. And if there's a concern that we're overpaying people, it's quite the opposite at this moment. So we have to ensure that there's retention that we want to consider as well. Because if we want to keep, people are here for different reasons. And I agree that certain people are here that isn't driven primarily by the compensation, but there are people that are, and there's a big chunk of them, but they also want to work on cool things and be part of DeFi as well. So just a variety of comments to think about and potentially start the discussion.
And I would add, I guess I kind of view those as slightly different. Like, there's two questions, like what should our total compensation be for this employee and what percent should be maker? Because you're right, we could be underpaying people, but then it's like, well, should we pay them more DAI, which as I structured it would also give them some more maker? Or do we need to give them a lot more maker and just keep their DAI the same? So I kind of view those as two different questions.
Well, it's a two-part. See, so MKR is only part of the equation, right? So the first piece of it is it's just pure compensation, right? And but by the way, both of these issues are not easy, and I get it. And I'm not trying to gloss over and saying this is simple. Compensation's always a tricky thing because you have different an organization that add different value. And so you have to compensate appropriately for that. Then there's the incentive discussion, and it's varied, right? In my past, I think I've experienced about every type of incentive program. And a lot of what I've seen is that whether it's stock options or the different qualified plans or RTUs or token restricted stock units, whatever it might be, is that there's typically a stacking effect that happens to get around a lot of what we see today in these huge price declines in the incentives. And over time, that'll tend to average out. And so there are different aspects that I think if a professional was engaged on an incentive perspective as well, we'd be able to match more industry norms and not have to worry about, as far as what's the split of compensation. We just design a plan and move forward with it. And every year we do a revision to it. So that's kind of what I'm recommending.
I think on the governance end, we've also touched on some of the issues with kind of unified plans, right? We've had a few plans be proposed in the past, some of which got partially adopted by some core units, some didn't get adopted. But one thing I kind of view is there's a lot of different motivations you could have for MKR compensation, right? A lot of the technical teams I know seem to cite hiring, right? It being a really necessary tool in hiring. I can tell you for GovAlpha, it was much more a retention standpoint, right? That's why we had the retaining MKR in the event they left, because we don't want you still here and working just to work out to the end of the best schedule. We want you here giving it your all, and if you're done, that's fine. Just transition out and on good terms, and you'll keep your MKR. There's also the incentive alignment portion. I saw some chat there that might be a good one to question. Is that really incentive alignment? But there's also protocol participation, right? MKR is a governance token. Distributing it to the workforce does decentralize the protocol to a certain extent. It's also used in backstopping options, and basically it's a tool for the protocol, and having it in the hands of people that care about it was a motivation for us to propose MKR comp at GovAlpha, because we felt well, if we're going to be giving out MKR, these are the people we want to have it. This aligns their incentive and makes me feel confident that when they're making decisions, they're not just thinking about short term, what's easiest to get the job done, but long term, okay, if I don't have maker, that's I don't have access to it for a year. How are the decisions I'm making going to affect the long term stability of this project? So I just wanted to get that in there. But I'm seeing some chat I'm going to catch up on now.
Hey, just one thing. I think this is done when we talk about stock options and other stuff is done very differently from org to org. But I'll say, like, at least in Silicon Valley, it didn't usually seem to be that price was part of the calculation of the token. You'd be at like a certain stage of startup, and there'd be a sort of standard like percentage of like token allocation for that stage of the startup. So like price was never really like, I don't know, sort of entered into the equation. I'll just add that as a you know, if you're on like an early stage startup, you might get like you know, 1% or 2% or 2.5% or something like that, some larger allocation on the earlier side. And then usually for like the stage of startup that we're in, it would be probably 0.1% or less of the outstanding token supply, which just happens to be like what PE's allocation was. But I do agree that like that level of compensation, at least like, you know, MKR compensation, is nowhere near as appealing as it was, you know, when MKR was, you know, much higher in price. And so a lot of startups will end up like doing a sort of yearly allocation of like more of their token in order to, you know, with new sort of vest cliffs and everything, to sort of keep people interested in performing in the long term, and keep incentives aligned in the long term, but also keep the sort of like, you know, rate of their compensation up. So you know, I noticed like in the discussion there was a lot of like price pinning of the MKR token, and I think it is a pretty standard thing to look at, just like percentage of the sort of pool of like, you know, incentive options or something instead.
Thanks for that insight, Chris. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I would certainly be willing to hear like more core units talk about kind of what motivated their vesting structure, perhaps, or maybe even some guidelines, like some ideals, I guess I would say, that we could maybe agree on for a comprehensive guideline. Noting, give about maybe 10 more minutes max. So you do have some thoughts. We do have some time for a little bit of back and forth.
I'll just emphasize your point, Peyton, that, you know, I think another consideration that I like to think about is like, who do we want helping to govern the protocol longer term? And if people are here for, you know, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, whatever, you know, they're getting into the weeds and they believe in the project enough to want to commit their full-time, you know, work life to that. And I think that's something that, you know, the DAO should value, and having those people, you know, also, you know, getting like maker comp to participate in governance is something that I would want for the community. I mean, I kind of came to this community as an investor, and, you know, had a bunch of maker already as one of my like largest personal you know, positions. And then getting, you know, maybe more maker on top of that to help govern the protocol. You know, even if, you know, my time with the protocol it ended at some point, you know, I'd still be, you know, interested in participating in governance. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that point that you made, Peyton.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm probably going to regret saying this, but the structure of the vest contract is such that we could in theory like make a version of it that takes the sort of pos proxy MKR and locks it into the chief, and then allows the sort of vesting to happen directly out of the chief. So we like, you know, would basically like free it when you vested, or free some portion of it when you're vesting. So that way, like people with MKR compensation could begin voting with the entire weight of their fully vested MKR. But they could only like actually sell it after like some period of the vest. I'll probably regret saying that, because it's like, when I think about it, it's kind of cool, and maybe we should do something like that, but it wouldn't be too technically complicated.
Love to see it. I suffer from the same thing, Chris. I'm like, well, you could do this really cool governance thing that'll probably make my life worse, but it'd be
Yeah,
interesting.
you know, a lot of the times, like you can come up with an idea, but those ideas would take like, you know, like a year to implement or something, right? Like you can think about, but this, like thinking about the structure of how our vests work, I actually don't think it would be too complicated. So.
Yeah, I mentioned in the chat while we were in Amsterdam, one of the guys from Urine did a really cool presentation about the process they underwent to kind of redo their compensation. There was some Twitter drama over that, not particularly trying to weigh into that, but what I thought was really cool was they basically like took all the core team and said, all right, you know, we want to allocate this much percentage of the revenue towards compensation. How much should everyone get? And kind of how they did it was they started with a blind round with everyone listing what percentage they thought they should be entitled to. They added it up. It was, you know, over 100. So then they started doing more open rounds where they went to people and said, all right, well, you know, if you're at this person's at this, like, do we think that's fair? And they eventually got to a point where they got under that 100% allocation solely by like voluntary people assigning and kind of self-assessing where they should be. Obviously their structure is a little bit different than ours, but I thought that was a really cool way to kind of imagine how you could do compensation completely differently. And there's lots of examples like that in that space that we could look to if we are trying to break away from trying to replicate like a corporate structure with a super liquid token, right? That's kind of the interesting thing is a lot of these tech vesting things are you know, they're illiquid. You're basically waiting for someone to buy out the company or go public, so you can sell out. Whereas MKR is well, maybe not highly liquid, but you can certainly swap it for any number of currencies you wish. You know, maybe a stretch too far, Patrick, but certainly more liquid than stock options for a company that isn't public. All right, kind of feels like we're winding down a bit here. I'll give one last call if there was anything else people want to express. Code9, obviously your proposal too, so feel more than free to weigh in again if you have anything else.
Just that I'm always happy to take feedback if someone's got an alternative vesting structure they think would work better, if they share it. So far I've seen people say, oh, I like it or I don't, but very little in the way of here's how I could improve it. That's what I'd really like, is just ideas for improvement.
Yeah, but we're asking the community to do something that, in my opinion, very few or none of us are qualified to do. So this comes up for a vote, and then if it does, then we're forced into a situation to potentially accept something that just isn't workable from the get-go. So my comment is that let's first agree if we need some guidelines, and if so, let's figure out the process by which we set those guidelines. I don't think this is the appropriate way to do it.
So in practice, that would mean what, like a signal request to see if people want guidelines. And if we want to set up like an SPF to hire someone who's an expert in this and have them put something together, that'd be great.
So yes, so that's my biggest concern is that the process itself, I don't think will yield the result that we're looking for. So if we can agree as a community that we need the guidelines, and then if that's the case, let's use an independent third party to develop those guidelines and then examine the proposals and then vote on something that has been constructed, or multiple proposals that have been constructed by independent third parties.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable. Let's work something out to get that written up.
Are we witnessing consensus finally? Wow, actual governance, you love to see it. Let's keep the conversation going on the forum there. I am noting the time. am going to try to transition us to winding down the meeting here, but really appreciate all the back and forth and the variety of stakeholders we had weigh in on today's call. That really makes it much more effective and yeah, valuable. So first off, thank you everyone for coming. I felt like this call was really respectful. We didn't talk over each other much. We respected each other's opinions. We took opposite sides with passion, but we're still able to kind of express our opinions and get to the gut of what we're trying to determine here. So a few reminders, message Patrick or I for POAP link. I see some DMs I need to reply to after this call. I put together that presentation on burnout. We'll be reaching out if you have anything you'd like to follow up with or add to. Also feel free to get in touch. I'll be adding the links to basically where I grabbed those screenshots and the few studies I referenced in case you'd like to peruse further. We heard about a couple different governance proposals today as well. So would appreciate if anyone wants to aggregate their feedback from today's call onto the forum, just so it's all in one place. That's always super helpful. And it looks like we'll probably be looking for some proposal edits coming down the line soon here. Just getting word that Rune is canceling the decentralized voter committee call today. So if you're looking to hear Rune talk about endgame, unfortunately today is not your day. But perhaps there's a bunch of people who might want to talk governance that have that slot freed up now. So thank you all again for attending. We'll be here same time, same place next week. And yeah, we'll see you in the forums. Have a good one.